All right, the last thing I want to talk about in this Unit 2 introduction is membrane permeability. And that's because this is one of the most important aspects of the membrane in regulating what gets into the cell and what gets out of the cell. And that regulation is really based on the permeability through the membrane itself. And then some things are going to need help via channels or transporters, and other things get through pretty easily on their own. So what I want you to do is think about the properties of the phospholipid bilayer and the cell membrane that we've talked about already, and then see if you can figure out which of these various molecules here, we have oxygen, triglyceride, carbon dioxide, etc., which of those are able to get through the membrane on their own without help, so without needing a channel or transporter, which ones permeate through the membrane on their own rapidly and easily, and which ones have more difficulty, basically would need help. So put those in order from the ones that get through the membrane the easiest to the ones that get through the membrane the hardest. And pause the video for a second and just really think about it and try to put those in order. Alright, so let's talk about this for a second. There are two aspects here that really regulate this. There are two aspects. Those two are polarity and size. And I'll say this right now, for the most part, polarity trumps size. So, if you're going to get through the membrane, let's look next slide here. Right, we know this membrane is hydrophobic in the interior. And so, if you are polar, you're going to hit that hydrophobic interior and basically be repelled. And if you have a charge, you're really going to be repelled. Basically, charge is like superpolarity, and so anything with a charge is repelled by that hydrophobic interior quite rapidly. But anything that's hydrophobic is going to make it through pretty easily because it's not repelled at all by that hydrophobic interior. And you might actually ask why it's in the polar part in the first place, but these things are so small that they actually dissolve in the aqueous solution, but they make it through this hydrophobic part right away. So, non-polar is going to get through much more easily than anything with polar, and polar gets through more easily than anything with a charge. Now, the other factor is size. Anything smaller is going to be able to make its way through this membrane much easier than anything larger, right? So if you have a big thing of Jell-O, for example, and you throw something small at it, it's going to penetrate easier than if you throw something huge at it. So huge is not going to get through quite as easily. But for the most part, polarity is more important. So here's the way I like to think of it. Anything small, non-polar, is going to make it through really easily. Then you kind of have larger non-polar. So if it's huge non-polar, then it still might not get through real easily, but a large non-polar one is going to get through more easily usually than anything that's a small polar. So you have small non-polar, then larger non-polar, then you have small polar, then larger polar, and then you have small charge. By that time you're really not getting through the membrane at all, and anything larger charged won't get through. So as we continue to think about this, essentially we have our small hydrophobic molecules that get through the easiest. Then we have larger nonpolar molecules, followed very closely by some of those small uncharged polar molecules. Now, both of this set, depending on the size and the polarity, they will probably get through on their own. We know water can get through the membrane, but we also know water gets through the membrane relatively slowly. So these can get through, but they might be slowed down a little bit, whereas oxygen, carbon dioxide just make it right through without any problem at all. And that's actually really important because if oxygen and carbon dioxide needed help to get through our cell membrane, it would be a lot harder for our cells to obtain the oxygen and get rid of the carbon dioxide that they need for cell respiration. And then we get to the parts that really don't get through. So if you have a large polar molecule, and basically anything that has a charge, then those things are not going to get through the membrane without help. So again, in quick summary, first is small nonpolar, then you have larger nonpolar, then you have small uncharged, then you have larger polar uncharged, and then you have ions, anything with a charge, and obviously things like DNA, RNA, and those larger charged molecules like proteins, they don't get through at all because not only do they have a charge, they're also huge.